Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Lennon from Baseball Development Group. Today I want to talk about something that's kind of come up over the last couple of weeks on social media, and it's this topic of slow motion video. And there's kind of two sides to this argument. One side is that, slow motion video does more harm than good. The other side of it has been, slow motion video and the advancements in slow motion video is, one of the most influential things in player development in the last decade. So I want to just talk about this topic of the democratization of slow motion video and just the advancements in it and how readily accessible it is. So I want to first talk about it from kind of the athlete's perspective. I'm going to break down some of the pros and cons, and then I'm going to jump into the coaching perspective. And then finally, I'm just going to kind of give my thoughts on what I think the best uses of slow motion video are and how I think we should be incorporating that into our coaching and ultimately with our athletes. Stepping away from the coaching side of things and viewing it more from the shoes of the athlete. So the first pro that comes to mind really is just the instantaneous feedback of slow motion video, right? The idea being that if I'm an athlete training alone, right, maybe there's not coaches present, maybe there's not other athletes present, I can go in and set up my phone on a tripod and get some instant feedback. And ultimately, what that's allowing me to do is evaluate feel versus real, right? A lot of times athletes can get very internalized and, start to feel certain things in the motion, but slow motion video can now actually break down some of those walls and barriers and show athletes what's really going on, okay? The second big pro in my mind for the athlete is just the shareability, right? The fact that, in their pocket is a device that they're able to connect with other coaches around the world or other athletes around the world and be able to share video of themselves to, one, get advice, or obviously, the advent of remote training, right? Without slow motion video and the democratization of it, remote training legitimately would not be possible, right? We're able to stay in contact with athletes across the world and touch base with them and analyze their mechanics in a way that, 10 years ago, 15 years ago was not possible. So that's obviously a big pro. But jumping into some of the cons, right? I think this is really where I want to kind of take a second to talk about, because I think this is something that athletes get really, really wrong very often in their training, especially when they're not, being guided by a coach through this process. So the first thing is that there's just infinite accessibility to slow motion video, right? The fact is that athletes can come in for a training session, and I'll see this in our gym at times, athletes are taking like 20, 30 videos of themselves in an actual session. And that's just really leading to what we would call paralysis by analysis, right? These guys are taking so much video of themselves and really breaking down every little minute detail that they're getting to the point where they're no longer just an athlete, and they're forgetting that the thing that has kind of gotten them to the point that they are is just being an athlete, being athletic, towing that rubber, and just going and doing their job, right? And I think this is where, as a coach, and I'm going to talk about this in the coming slides, this is where a lot of our job comes in, is about trying to educate the athletes on how to best use this technology, how to best use slow motion video, so that they're not just getting lost in the kind of oblivion that is all this analysis that can be done. The second big thing, and again, in a similar vein, is macro versus micro analysis. And I think this is something that athletes really, really get wrong. And it's honestly a conversation that I have with athletes, several times a day in gym, is that especially on training days when you're not working at that upper echelon of RPE, right? The biggest thing that you got to keep in mind is that mechanics, kinematics, all this stuff is going to change with effort. So oftentimes athletes are taking this video of themselves in slow motion in a training atmosphere where they're only necessarily throwing 60% effort, and they're viewing everything from the macro perspective, right? They're watching the entire sequence of the throw, really trying to nitpick on every detail, versus myself as a coach, I might go into that video, scrub through halfway, find exactly what I want to look at and focus entirely on that and cut out all the rest of the stuff, because I know, half of those things are going to change with effort, and all I want to do is really narrow in my focus and look at one particular thing. And again, I think that's something that athletes really don't do a good job of, is they're trying to view the entire throw at a time when maybe it's better to be viewing things in very small chunks, okay? Now, talking from the coaching perspective, okay, let's dive into some of the pros on the coaching side of things. Similar to the athlete, right, we're able to get instant feedback. I'm able to see something that my eyes cannot, right? The throw is happening in, a millisecond, and my eyes are just not good enough to be able to capture enough detail in that short time frame to really be able to conceptualize what's happening in the throw. So slow motion video is obviously a major tool in the tool belt as a coach when it comes to analyzing movement on the mound, and we're able to then share that feedback, analyze it in real time, and share it with the athlete, okay? The other thing with this, right, is that slow motion video over the years, especially in the last 3-4 years, has gotten to the point where the quality is good enough to now be using technologies like Pitch AI, which is able to give you objective biomechanical data based off of just an iPhone video, right? It wasn't too long ago that guys were drawing squiggly lines on slow motion video as a means of analysis, and now we're able to actually get real quantifiable, research grade biomechanics through the palm of our hands. So that's something that, is another major pro of slow motion video. And, this is kind of where that argument of slow motion video is a massive advancement in player development really does shine true, is the fact that there's just so much application and there's so much more to come in the coming years with this technology, okay? But, and then the last thing that I wanted to talk about as a pro is a lot of our athletes are visual learners, right? Some of them are kinesthetic and they're really, good at feeling certain things, right? But a very massive portion of the population, especially, in these newer generations, are going to be visual learners, right? They need to see stuff happen to be able to conceptualize it and translate it into learning. So this is an opportunity where we're able to throw up a video of themselves on the screen and show them exactly what they look like, and they're able to process that and then make adjustments as required. Okay, but jumping into the con side of things, and this is where the very first thing that I want to talk about is the reliance. And this is where, some of those old school coaches, quote unquote, I think have a very good point, is that, even myself, I find this often, is that, we're getting to a point at some times where you almost can't coach without, your phone right next to you. And while I think that, taking slow motion video in real time is a fantastic tool in the tool belt, and it clearly gives you more information and more detail than what your eyes can see, there's also certain things that iPhone won't be able to tell you, right? And there's certain things that building the relationship with the athlete, watching their tempo on the mound, watching their body language, seeing what their breath looks like, right? All those stuff you can't necessarily see in a slow motion video, right? So sometimes I think it's appropriate as a coach to take a step back away from the camera, right, and try to watch the athlete in real time, and you're going to pick up a couple things that you're not necessarily going to see in that slow motion video. They're not going to be kinematics, they're not going to be kinetics, right? They're not going to be necessarily directly related to the mechanics of the throw, but they're going to be things that are very influential in terms of setting up all those things that actually go into making up the throwing motion. The other con here is that I think when you're talking about the kind of feedback loop throughout a training session, sometimes analyzing slow motion video in real time can break up the training flow. And what I mean by that is that it kind of slows down the feedback loop where you have to spend time scrubbing through the video, looking at what you're trying to analyze, and then relaying that back to the athlete, okay? There also can often ends up becoming too much emphasis on mechanics when you're doing this, right? I'm kind of thinking about the scenario of a bullpen session, leading up to, a conference kind of. There also can be too much emphasis on mechanics in this scenario, right? I'm thinking about that prototypical kind of side session in between a start, where we're starting to get too much mechanical, where we're analyzing video, and the athlete might, it might be a better strategy for the athlete to be more focused on execution of pitches than it is trying to, change their mechanics or hone in and tinker with their mechanics in that scenario. Now, how do I think slow motion video should actually be used? I think there's both sides of this argument that I agree with, and I think ultimately it comes down to, just like every piece of technology, it comes down to using it appropriately. I think first and foremost, I think the application of slow motion video needs to be coach guided. I think the more education that you can give athletes in terms of what they should be videoing, when they should be videoing, and why it's important to take continuous videos of themselves, I think the more context you can give to all of that, the better you're going to have and the better feedback loops you're going to have with your athletes. The other thing that I wanted to mention here is the accountability that slow motion video provides is astronomical, right? Especially with the technologies like Pitch AI that are coming out now, we're able to get objective data on those slow motion videos. And the thing that I'm really excited about there is being able to quantify kind of our coaching interventions, right? Whether it's our drills or our cues, we're going to be able to start, shifting into this era where we're able to evaluate ourselves as coaches, right? We're able to take a kind of case study. These are my three, go-to cues that I use for directing back leg mechanics. We're now able to take technologies like Pitch AI and be able to see, if those cues actually are making the changes that I think they're making. And I think that's something that's really, really exciting and something that, in terms of a use of slow motion video, that has to be up there, as one of the best uses for it. The last thing, too, that I wanted to make mention of, and I think this is, again, something that coaches and athletes alike can start to go down the wrong rabbit hole with, is they're using videos and they're trying to break down their mechanics in a very negative light. So what I mean by that is kind of taking a throw and trying to highlight all the negative things, right? Okay, your pelvis isn't at the right position at foot plant, your hip shoulder separation is lacking, your external rotation isn't great, right? All that stuff is somewhat necessary from a diagnostic standpoint, but in terms of a daily training application, I would really caution other coaches, and it's something that I do with my athletes. I try not to show them too much video of them in a negative light, and instead try to focus on finding positives in videos and sending videos to them that show themselves in the best light. So I think one of the best practices we can get into as coaches is after the training session, after reviewing some slow motion video of the athlete, whether it be in a drill scenario or throwing on the mound, taking out the couple of throws that I think are the best throws from a mechanic standpoint, and then sending them to the athlete so that they can watch it on loop, right? And now they're able to familiarize themselves in their brain and try to connect the dots, and every time that they're thinking about their mechanics, they're replaying their mechanics at the highest level, or at least in the most positive light, versus always thinking about their mechanics in this negative connotation. Those are kind of my thoughts on this idea. I think, like I said, both sides of the spectrum I can kind of agree with, and I understand where people are coming from when they say that, slow motion video is creating worse athletes, and, slow motion video is a fantastic tool. I think it ultimately comes down to how you use the technology, how you use the application of that video, and I hope this video kind of shows you guys the way that I use it, the way that I think about slow motion video, and some tips that you guys can utilize with your athletes.